let me riff for a second. I don't know if you had a chance to watch this yet, but there was an HBO documentary that just came out maybe a week or two ago at this point called Savior Complex. And you should write that down, Savior Complex. I don't have that right in front of me, but I will show you. No, I'll get back to it in a second. But basically, I'm going to tell you the story behind this. It's a 3-part docuseries. Each episode is about an hour long. But let me tell you the backstory for Savior Complex, because it's messed up. And I remember hearing about it years ago, and I had kind of put it out of my mind until this series was released. But basically, the story here is there was a 19-year-old woman. Her name was Renee Bach. She was a homeschooled Christian, lived in Virginia. And like so many other homeschooled people that live in these conservative homes, go to conservative churches, she decided she wanted to be a missionary. And where does she want to spread the gospel? Uganda is what she landed on. So she went to Uganda and she decided she wanted to help malnourished children, which, you know what? That's great. Good for her. That's a good cause. Better than building a church or just praying over people. So she wanted to help these children. She formed a nonprofit called Serving His Children, which used money raised from her church to supposedly help these kids. It covered a lot of medicine, a lot of the food that kids who are malnourished would need. Again, that's wonderful. She even had a nurse on staff, several volunteers. But here's where it went horribly wrong. Renee has no medical training whatsoever, but that didn't stop her from doing medical shit on these children who needed medical help. She seriously thought God would just guide her hands and tell her what to do. And basically, she treated these kids who were dying like they were lab rats. And even if a nurse was nearby or other trained professionals were surrounding her, she would still perform roles meant for a qualified nurse, not a random Christian who is just running on good intentions. And the kicker, I'm going to show you this headline because this is kind of how you may have heard of this story. 105 kids died. Here you go. 105 children died in her organization. She was supposed to care for them, and then over 100 of those kids died. That's Renee for you right there. So this is what Savior Complex kind of gets into, because as much as you want to just get angry about this and blame Renee for what she did, there actually is some nuance to this story. But before I get there, there are 2 mothers in 2019 whose kids died under her watch. They sued her for misrepresenting herself as a doctor and saying that she had this clinic, which it wasn't a clinic. A New Yorker article from a couple years ago actually said, I'm going to read you a portion of what it said. A gardener who worked there for 3 years, this is at Saving, what was it called again? Yeah, Serving His Children. A gardener who worked there for 3 years asserts that Bach posed as a doctor. She dressed in a clinical coat, often had a stethoscope around her neck, and on a daily basis, I would see her medicating children. An American nurse who volunteered at Saving His Children states that Bach, quote, felt God would tell her what to do for a child. A Ugandan driver says that for 8 years, quote, on average, I would drive at least 7 to 10 dead bodies of children back to their villages each week. So that's horrifying. Renee Bach would put IVs into these kids. She would prescribe medication. She performed at least 1 blood transfusion. And look, there are some aspects of medical care that anyone can just learn how to do with a bit of training. That could happen. But to have a layperson do all of that is very unethical. And also, the reason you don't want a random person doing a lot of this stuff is because there are potential problems. What if something goes wrong? Well, a trained medical professional knows how to deal with the troubleshooting. A random person hasn't done that. They don't know what to do in those situations, and their intervention could make the problem worse. So the lawyers, one of the lawyers for the mothers who were suing Renee Bach actually said, imagine if a 20-something Ugandan woman had gone to the United States and set up an equivalent arrangement to treat impoverished American children. She would have been prosecuted. She would have been behind bars. And that's absolutely true. There's no way that would be allowed in the United States. So this documentary, this whole story of Renee, it goes into white saviors. You know, these white people who just go to these countries full of African people and think they are going to save them and no one else can. It talks about voluntourism, that you want to see the world, so you're going to volunteer in these countries, but are you really helping? Not really. It questions how Uganda could allow someone like her to care for children without a medical license. Like, what the hell were they doing? So I told you there was some nuance to this, and this is what they actually get into in the documentary, which I do appreciate. Here's one example of what I'm talking about when it comes to nuance, because how on earth could there be what's the upside? What's the silver lining to what Renee was doing? Well, for example, there was a nearby children's hospital, but they didn't have the money that Renee did, so they didn't necessarily have the medical equipment and the medicine and all that stuff that Renee had access to. So, like, they couldn't provide the care that Renee might have been able to provide. Another thing, Renee, according to their documentation, 105 children died. That is a mortality rate of 11% of all the kids who were in their care. Well, guess what? Over that same time period, that nearby children's hospital had a mortality rate of 14%. So does that mean Renee actually did better than the hospital? That is what Renee says. However, you have to think that if a kid is in the hospital, they're probably more likely to be on the verge of death. The hospital's getting kids who are more sick, so their mortality rates are going to be higher. At the same time, keep in mind that because Renee had money but no skills and wasn't surrounding herself the right way, even if she had an 11% mortality rate, is there a chance that rate could have been lower if she actually hired doctors to do the job? Arguably so. And then how come that doesn't matter? Like, if she had listened more than tried to do this shit herself, wouldn't those lives have been saved? Some lives, maybe. Then again, with the nuance, like, if she wasn't there at all, what would have happened to some of these kids who couldn't go to a hospital or something? So none of that is to say she should be let off the hook, but that, it's not her fault alone. There are plenty of people who egged her on, who helped her do this. People had the opportunity to stop her along the way. They didn't. Christians donated to her cause because she was documenting it on her blog for several years. They didn't say anything was wrong with this. They gave her money to keep doing it. And by the way, she was posting when some of these kids died too. That didn't stop these people. And also, Uganda deserves some blame for not having a good system of checks and balances to keep people like her out. Here's another thing I liked about the docuseries, Savior Complex. They actually focused on a group called No White Saviors, which included a white woman who was kind of like Renee. She went to Uganda to do some missionary work and then realized, oh, they don't actually want me here, and I don't think this is a good idea. So she started with other people. She started a group called No White Saviors. And when they heard about Renee's story, they started posting really straightforward, blunt, sometimes exaggerated and harmful things about Renee was doing. Like, she's murdering people. She's the devil incarnate. It's a very one-sided view of what was happening. They were just blasting this stuff out on social media, whipping up a frenzy against Renee, and also, earning their No White Saviors group some money in the process. Well, to her credit, the producer of the series, she spoke with Renee. She spoke with Renee's mother. She spoke with this white woman behind No White Saviors, who doesn't exactly come off looking great. She looks like someone with an axe to grind the entire time. And also, all these people are just doing this all on social media, trying to one-up each other. Like, one person saying, "We saved kids, give us more money." The other saying she's killing kids. Give us more money to stop her. And it's, I don't know, I don't feel good about any of these particular groups because the No White Saviors group also took things very far. They took things out of context at times. They made it look a lot worse than the actual full story makes it seem. The only person in the series I really liked and who I think came off looking pretty well was a nurse named Jackie Kramlich, who is really a Christian missionary who went to Uganda. She heard about what Renee was doing. She said, "All right, God is calling me to go to Uganda and work with Renee." And she had talent, like she is a nurse. But when she went there, she realized pretty quickly, "Oh no, what are you doing here?" And within a few months, she got the hell out. And she wrote a letter to the board of directors of Renee's group saying, "You got to stop all of this right now because this is messed up." Unfortunately, the board of Renee's organization consisted of like her mom and other church people. And like none of them took that letter seriously. Um, it's a really, I haven't given anything away. That's the thing. We all knew that story years ago. I will show you. This is the article from the New Yorker that really covered this stuff in depth a couple of years ago. A Missionary on Trial. It's really long. It's written by Ariel Levy, who's a wonderful writer for that magazine. And it really covers this stuff in a lot of depth. If you get a chance, look that up, read it. It's wonderful. I'll send it to you if you can't get access to it. One thing I really appreciated about Savior Complex is one, you get to actually see their faces talk about this stuff. It gives people a chance to really understand this story. But really, what I like is that stories like this take issues that matter to people like us and they bring it to mainstream audiences. Like, I like that this story, which was really only covered in like church state separation areas or like niche magazines or like NPR, now it's on HBO. A lot more people are going to learn about these issues. They're going to get their opinion about missionary work and when it can be messed up. They get the idea of no white saviors, which is a good concept for them to learn. It's the same thing as like the Duggar one that came out a few months ago, Shiny Happy People, on Amazon Prime Video. Because again, I'm sure people know about the Duggars. I don't think they know a lot about the religious fundamentalism that they grew up in, but Shiny Happy People really talked a lot about that messed up religious belief, all those beliefs that underlied all the horrible stuff that happened with the Duggars. So I love that these docuseries are finally reaching other audiences, bringing our issues to the public. Like there is an audience eager to hear fair criticism of faith-based beliefs. And that's very different from people, I mean, myself included, who just kind of trash religion all the time. I'm not pretending I get through to everybody, but these sorts of docuseries, which I think are about as fair as they ought to be, they do give people this insight into these organizations, these people that don't show religion in a good light, because in these cases, you shouldn't show religion in a good light. It is really hard to watch a series like this one, Savior Complex, and come away with more sympathy for the religious people who do a bunch of horrible things in the name of God. Like we see them harming people. We hear about them harming people. I don't know what you do with that information if you don't follow this stuff other than to think, wow, I don't think I'll give money to my church for mission trips in the future. I don't think I want to belong to my church in the future. So that is, I hope, one of the upsides that comes from this series.